I spent my entire life giving me time, my money, my heart only to be reduced to a joke at my own dinner table. Imagine standing in the house you bought, the walls you painted, the meals you prepared,
Margaret.
only to hear your son's
Margaret.
wife laugh and call you the maid. And worse, your own son laughed with her. That night, something inside me broke not with rage, but with clarity. The next morning, I handed her the keys and said, "Good luck with the mortgage." What happened after would unravel decades of lies, expose secrets buried in hospital files, and reveal the shocking truth that the boy I raised was never mine at all. This is not just a story about betrayal, it is a story about awakening. Stay with me and subscribe to Silent Lies, because what comes next will change everything you thought you knew about family. The night it happened was supposed to be ordinary, yet it became the moment that fractured everything I thought I knew about family. I had spent the entire day preparing tidying rooms, setting out dishes, seasoning the roast chicken that had been marinating since dawn. The jazz record hummed faintly in the background, filling the silence of the house I had poured every ounce of my life into. A house that carried my signature on the mortgage papers, my down payment, my sacrifices. And yet, as the laughter of guests echoed in the dining room, I realized I was nothing more than an extra in my own story. Olivia, my son Ethan's wife, had once again forgotten to tell me her parents were visiting. By the time I returned from errands, the driveway was full of unfamiliar cars, and I slipped inside quietly, wine bottle in hand, hoping I could stay invisible. I thought perhaps I could sit in the background, refill glasses, and disappear upstairs unnoticed. But fate never lets you slip away so gently. Her mother looked at me as if I were some puzzle piece that did not belong. Her eyes were sharp, curious but dripping with disdain. "And you are?" she asked. A polite guest would have waited for an introduction, but not her. She wanted to know why a stranger was pouring wine in her daughter's house. Before I could answer, Olivia's laugh cut through the air. She tilted her glass, her voice carrying like a bell meant to draw attention. "Oh, that's Margaret," she said, dismissive, amused. "Our unofficial maid. Keeps the house running." The words landed like a blade, slicing through the evening's shallow warmth. And then, as if the knife wasn't sharp enough, they all laughed. Olivia's parents, the acquaintances around the table, and worst of all, my own son, Ethan. I stood frozen, clutching the empty wine bottle as if it were an anchor keeping me from drifting into nothingness. My lips stretched into a polite smile, but inside, my chest caved in, my heart splintering piece by piece. No one corrected her. No one defended me. Ethan, the boy I raised through every sleepless night and hungry day, let them laugh at my expense. I excused myself quietly, placed the bottle on the counter, and walked slowly to my room. Behind me, the laughter continued, as though I had been dismissed like the help, a servant fading into the wallpaper. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door I had painted with my own hands years ago. I remembered signing the mortgage papers when Ethan had just finished college. Olivia wasn't in the picture then. They had nothing. I gave them everything. And now, I was reduced to a punchline, the maid. When morning came, I moved through the house with the same routine I had kept for years. I brewed coffee, fed the cat Olivia pretended to adore, straightened the curtains. But something was different. My movements were deliberate, final. The clarity of betrayal had settled into my bones. Olivia came down the stairs in her yoga outfit, phone glued to her hand, not even glancing at me. I stood in the kitchen waiting until she finally looked up, eyebrows raised in irritation at my presence.
Ethan,
without a word, I held out the keys. Every single one, the front door, the back door, the garage, the mailbox. She frowned, confused. "What's this?"
I was never crazy.
I smiled, calm in a way that startled even me. "Good luck paying the mortgage now." Her face faltered, but I didn't wait for an answer. I walked past her, down the hall lined with framed photos I had chosen, furniture I had bought, walls I had painted. I didn't pack a box, didn't take a single plate or blanket, only my purse and the old coat I had worn when I first brought Ethan home from the hospital. I opened the front door, the weight of silence pressing against my shoulders. Ethan's voice called after me, panicked, but I didn't stop. He chased me barefoot into the driveway, but I kept walking. My steps were steady, my breath even, my resolve unshaken. I slid into the car, closed the door gently, not with rage, but with certainty, because something inside me had snapped. Not the wild kind of snapping that comes with screaming or breaking dishes. No, this was something quieter, sharper, clarity.
I am so
And clarity
unemployed.
doesn't roar. It whispers. It tells you what you've known all along but refused to face. That you are done. I drove away from the house that had once been my dream, leaving behind the people who had turned it into my prison. In the rearview mirror, Ethan stood frozen in the driveway, stunned, uncomprehending. He had no idea what he had just lost. Neither did I. But what I did know with a certainty that felt like freedom was that I was not coming back. Not this time. Not ever. The first night in the small apartment left to me by my late Aunt Ruth was not freedom. It was silence. Heavy silence. The kind that lingers like a stranger in the room, reminding you of what you have lost. The heater rattled like an old man coughing. The wallpaper yellowed with decades of neglect. I dropped my purse on the table and stared at the chipped tiles, wondering if I should cry, scream, or laugh. I did neither. I just stood there, feeling the emptiness wrap around me like a shroud. Over the next days, I drifted through that apartment like a ghost. I slept on the couch because the bed frame was broken, ate peanut butter sandwiches and instant soup because I couldn't bring myself to cook. I didn't call anyone. Not Ethan, not old friends, no one. And no one called me either. The silence cut deeper than words ever could. Perhaps Olivia had convinced Ethan to stay away, or perhaps worse, she simply didn't care. At night, memories clawed at me. I thought of that dinner, of their laughter. I thought of Ethan, my boy, the one I had raised alone after his father left. I thought of the jobs I took just to keep food on the table, cleaning motel rooms, stocking shelves at dawn. I thought of the life insurance money I inherited when my parents died, every cent of which I poured into a house so my son would never feel the insecurity I knew as a child. And now, in Olivia's narrative, I had been recast as the maid. To keep from unraveling, I began writing. Old spiral notebooks I had once bought for Ethan in middle school became my confessional. Page after page, I poured out things I had never said aloud, how I waited for a thank you that never came, how I cried in the garage when they went out without me, how I pretended to be asleep so I wouldn't hear them mocking my TV shows in the living room I paid for. Writing didn't heal me, but it kept me from vanishing completely. Then one evening, while rummaging in the upstairs storage closet for a light bulb, I stumbled across an old metal trunk. It was rusted, heavy, the same trunk Ruth used to keep under her sewing machine. My heart beat faster as I dragged it out, coughing from the dust. I expected thread, buttons, maybe old photographs. What I found instead shifted the ground beneath me. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, some filled with receipts, some with brittle papers, and one in particular addressed to me in Ruth's familiar handwriting, dated nearly 30 years ago. My hands shook as I opened it. If you're reading this, it means you've come back, and I'm sorry you had to. I froze. The pages were yellowed, fragile. Tucked inside were copies of hospital records, legal documents, even a photograph of a newborn swaddled in a hospital blanket. Not Ethan, the name printed beneath Michael Jameson. I read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. Ruth had been a nurse at the hospital where I gave birth. She wrote about how she had noticed something odd, that night an unexpected room change, confusion with the ID tags on the bassinets. She raised the issue, but by the time she did, it was too late. The babies had already gone home. She said she lived with guilt, afraid to tell me, hoping she was wrong. But years later, while sorting through old files, she found the proof. A settlement quietly paid to another family. A family named Jameson. I dropped the papers onto the floor, my chest heaving. Ethan wasn't my son. He had never been mine. The boy I carried home, the boy I raised, sacrificed everything for he belonged to someone else. At first I expected to feel grief, rage, despair. But instead, what filled me was something stranger. Relief. For years I had felt a distance from Ethan I couldn't explain. A coldness that gnawed at me no matter how much love I gave. And in that moment, the pieces fell into place. Maybe it wasn't my imagination. Maybe he had always been a stranger. Because in truth, he was. Still, relief did not erase the ache. I held the photograph of Michael Jameson, tracing the faded outline of his tiny face. My son. My real son. He had grown up just miles away, while I gave my life to another's child who never once defended me. That night, I sat with Ruth's letters spread out across the kitchen table, the old heater groaning in the corner. She had left everything. DNA reports, affidavits, newspaper clippings about the Jameson family. They were educated, successful, still living nearby. My son had been here all along. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a maid. I saw a woman broken, yes, but also awakening. The silence that had once crushed me now carried another weight, the weight of truth. And the truth was both unbearable and liberating. In the days that followed, I carried Ruth's secret like a live wire inside me, dangerous to touch, impossible to ignore. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't reach out to the Jamesons. I simply moved through each day with a secret humming in my chest, reshaping who I was. The Margaret who had raised Ethan was gone, and in her place stood someone who knew the ground she walked on was no longer the same. The ghost I had become was beginning to stir. There is a silence that feels peaceful, like the stillness of dawn before the birds begin to sing. But the silence I lived in after Ruth's revelation was nothing like that. It was thick, punishing, echoing through the walls of the apartment until I thought it might consume me whole. Each morning I woke, brewed a single cup of coffee, and stared out the dusty kitchen window. Each evening I sat curled under blankets, the heater wheezing as though it too carried secrets too heavy to bear. I didn't know who I was anymore. The Margaret who raised Ethan was gone. That Margaret had been a mother, a provider, a giver of everything. But what was left of me when even motherhood had been stolen? I drifted through days in a fog, carrying Ruth's letter in my pocket as if the truth itself might vanish if I let it out of my sight. At night, I reread the documents by candlelight, tracing the signatures and timestamps until my eyes blurred. Every detail confirmed the unthinkable. Ethan wasn't mine, and my real son, Michael Jameson, had been living just a few miles away. For weeks, I didn't act. I simply existed, suspended between two lives I had left behind and one I had yet to step into. I didn't call Ethan, though his silence confirmed what my heart already knew. He hadn't reached out, not once. Perhaps Olivia had told him not to. Perhaps more cruelly, he simply didn't care. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, walking into town with no purpose, that my feet carried me to the corner of Main and Elm. There it was, Jameson's books. I froze across the street, my heart hammering as if I'd stumbled into a dream. The storefront was painted deep green, hand-lettered signs curling across the windows. And inside him, Michael. I didn't need to ask. I knew. He stood behind the counter helping a young woman choose a poetry collection. His posture calm, his voice gentle. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and smiled with a kindness that pierced me. My son, my blood, my everything. I couldn't move. I stood there on the sidewalk, tears slipping silently down my cheeks, soaking the collar of my coat. I didn't go inside. Not that day, not the next. But soon it became a ritual. I would walk the block, sit on the bench with a paper cup of coffee, pretending to scroll through my phone while my eyes remained fixed on him. It wasn't stalking. It was mourning. It was also preparation. I studied the rhythm of the bookstore, the schedule of deliveries, the familiar faces of customers. I learned the way he tilted his head when he listened, the way he laughed softly as though he didn't want to disturb anyone. Each detail was a thread pulling me closer, weaving a picture of the son I should have known all along. But while I watched Michael, I also turned my gaze back toward Ethan and Olivia. They thought I was gone, invisible, but I was more present than ever. Olivia's social media left a trail a child could follow: brunches, yoga classes, staged photo shoots. I pieced together their life like a puzzle, and what I saw made me sick. They weren't thriving. They were pretending. Olivia's so-called lifestyle business was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Rented office space, paid followers, credit cards stretched to their limits. Ethan, my son in name only, had quit his job months ago. She called it manifesting a new chapter. I called it delusion. It was a house of cards, and the wind was already rising. That was when I began my second journal. The first had been filled with grief and confessions. The second was colder, sharper, a ledger of facts, dates, receipts, public records, patterns of their comings and goings. Every discovery tightened the web I was spinning, not out of vengeance but out of necessity. They thought I had been silenced, erased, but I was watching. I was waiting. And Michael Hay was the light guiding me out of the shadows. The first time our eyes met, I nearly collapsed. It was raining, the bookstore nearly empty, and he was restocking shelves, humming softly to himself, unaware of the storm raging just outside. I lingered too long by the window, and when he glanced up, his gaze caught mine. He smiled. Just a small, polite curve of the lips meant for a stranger. That was what I was to him, a stranger. My hands shook so badly I could hardly pretend to check my phone. I turned quickly, ducking around the corner, tears spilling before I reached the car. How do you tell someone their entire life began with a mistake?
Goodbye.
How do you shatter a truth so carefully constructed? Back at the apartment, I clutched Ruth's letter until my fingers ached. She hadn't guessed. She had known. She had investigated, uncovered settlement papers, documented everything. The Jamesons had accepted their quiet payout,
I am awake now.
agreeing never to speak of it again. And so, the truth had been buried until now. I didn't hate Ethan, not exactly. My love for him had been real, even if it was never returned in kind. But each day that passed made one thing clearer. Ethan had chosen his path. He had chosen Olivia, chosen to dismiss me, chosen silence over respect. Michael, on the other hand, had shown me more kindness in one passing smile than Ethan had in years.
You never help me.
I wasn't ready to tell him. Not yet. But the day was coming, so I wrote. Every night, hunched over the small kitchen table, I filled pages with strategy. Not grief this time, but intent. Every piece of Olivia's fraudulent empire I uncovered went into the journal. Every debt, every fake testimonial, every business filing. I was preparing for the collapse, and when it came, I would not be caught in the rubble. Because clarity had taught me one truth. Sometimes the only way to be seen is to step out of the light and become the shadow. From there, you can see everything. And from there, I was about to reclaim the life they thought they had taken from me. The decision came quietly, like most turning points do. I had spent weeks haunting the edges of my old life, writing notes, studying patterns, watching both Ethan and Olivia stumble deeper into the illusions they had built. But knowledge without action is just another form of silence, and I had lived in silence long enough. The first step was legal. The house, the very house where I had been reduced to a maid in front of strangers, was still mine on paper. My down payment, my credit, my name. For years, Ethan had said, "We'll change it later, Mom, no rush." But there had never been any rush for him. I was paying every bill. Now, that oversight was my weapon. I met with a lawyer downtown, a sharp woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened as I laid out the story, from the mortgage papers to Olivia's sneering laughter. She didn't gasp or pity me. Instead,
Hello,
she
Margaret.
tapped her
Thank you
pen
for coming
against
in
the
today.
desk and
It's good to
said,
meet you.
"You have every right. We'll file this week." For the first time in months, I felt steady. I signed the papers with a hand that did not shake. Walking out of her office into the cold city air, I realized something profound. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. About finally stepping into the role I had denied myself, protector of my own dignity. But legal measures were only one side of the blade. Olivia's empire, her curated identity of wellness and empowerment, was more fragile than glass. And glass, when it shatters, cuts everyone holding it. I wanted facts, not whispers. So I hired someone. Darren, a discreet consultant who specialized in peeling back layers of businesses that looked too glossy to be real. "I don't want anything illegal," I told him, "just the truth." He nodded once, understanding. A week later, he handed me a folder so neat, so damning, it might as well have been a guillotine. Inside were invoices from clients that didn't exist, tax filings that hadn't been made in 2 quarters, photographs staged at rented homes to fabricate success. Olivia's brand wasn't just smoke, and Mirasit was fraud dressed in silk robes. Would this hold up under scrutiny? I asked. Darren leaned back, folding his hands.
Oh my goodness.
If this goes public, she's finished. Financially,
believe this.
professionally, socially.
She's grounded for life.
I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Instead, I printed copies and placed them in a plain envelope. No return address. No signature. Just one line scrawled across the top page. "Everything you think you know is a performance." 2 days later, the first cracks appeared. Olivia's Instagram stories stopped. Her posts, once flooded with praise, were suddenly filled with cryptic comments. "Is this true? Where are your clients now?" Lies catch up eventually. Her website went down for maintenance. A scheduled workshop was abruptly canceled, and then the whispers reached me through a neighbor who still followed her accounts. Olivia's mother had been seen storming out of the house,
Mom,
face red,
please don't do this.
phone pressed to her ear, shouting. The same woman who once clinked wine glasses in my kitchen, laughing as I was reduced to the help, was now watching her daughter's empire crumble. I didn't need to lift a finger. Truth was doing the work for me. Meanwhile, the legal process began to stir. Ethan and Olivia received notice that the house was being listed under my name. Panic rippled through their curated world. Olivia tried to argue contribution, claiming her value made the home partially hers. My lawyer didn't even blink. "Let her prove it in court," she said. Olivia couldn't. Every pillow, Every piece of furniture, every wall, they had all been chosen and paid for by me. I imagined them pacing inside those walls, realizing the foundation beneath their feet was already gone. The house was never theirs. It had always been mine. Ethan called. I let the phone buzz until it went silent. Olivia left voicemails, her tone brittle and falsely sweet. Margaret, we really need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. You're putting our lives at risk. Their words rolled off me like rain on glass. For years, my voice hadn't mattered. Now, my silence was louder than any scream. But in the midst of their unraveling, I kept moving toward Michael. I still visited the bookstore, buying novels I barely read, watching him laugh with customers, memorizing the cadence of his voice. Each small kindness he showed a stranger was like a blade in my chest. How could Ethan, the boy I raised, treat me with contempt, while this man-me son in truth offered warmth so freely? The contrast was unbearable, and yet it gave me strength.
Please just call me back.
At night, I wrote in my second journal, filling pages with evidence, not only of Olivia's fraud, but of Ethan's negligence. His debts, his empty resumes, every thread of their carefully woven mask, catalogued and ready to be pulled. I wasn't driven by rage anymore. Rage burns too hot and too fast. What fueled me now was clarity, and clarity is patient. The dominoes had begun to fall. Olivia's business faltered. Ethan grew desperate, and all the while, I remained calm,
I don't know, she's been out
the
here all
architect of silence. I didn't slam doors. I didn't shout. I watched. I waited. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the strings. The first strike had landed, and it was only the beginning. The storm finally reached Ethan. For weeks I had ignored his calls, let his text messages sit unread, watched from a distance as the house of cards he built with Olivia began to collapse. But desperation has a way of making itself heard. One afternoon, I saw his shadow through the peephole of my apartment door. He stood there, hair uncombed, dark circles bruised beneath his eyes. When he knocked, it was soft, hesitant. "Mom," he called, his voice cracking. "Please, don't do this." I stood on the other side, my hand resting on the knob, but I didn't open it. For years I had begged for acknowledgement, begged for respect. Now it was his turn to sit in silence. After a while, his footsteps faded, leaving only the echo of his plea. But Ethan wasn't one to give up easily when the ground was crumbling beneath him. Days later,
Which one
he
looks
returned.
interesting?
This time I opened the door. He looked smaller somehow, as though life itself had carved away the arrogance he once wore so easily. He stepped inside, awkward and restless, pacing like a caged animal. "Why are you doing this to us?" he demanded finally, though his voice shook. "Us?" I repeated, a bitter laugh caught in my throat. "There hasn't been an us for years, Ethan." He flinched. "I grew up in that house. It's mine too. You're throwing it all away." "No," I said evenly. "I'm taking back what was always mine. The house, my dignity, my voice, things you and Olivia tried to strip away from me." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he sank into the chair opposite me. His shoulders slumped. "I didn't know it hurt you that much," he whispered. "That's the problem," I said coldly. "You never cared to know." He rubbed his face with his hands, muttering something about Olivia not being who he thought she was.
Who I am
I didn't respond. His regrets didn't move me. Regret without change is just another form of cowardice. But then I did something I hadn't planned. I walked to the drawer, pulled out the envelope Ruth had left me, and set it on the table between us. Ethan stared at it, confused. "What's this?" "Your birth records," I said. My voice was calm, steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. He frowned, opening the papers with trembling fingers. I watched as his face shifted confusion, disbelief, horror. This can't be real," he stammered. "It's real," I replied. "You were never my son, Ethan. Not by blood." He looked up, his eyes wide, glassy. "You're saying I'm not yours?" "I'm saying you weren't born to me, but I raised you as if you were. I gave you everything I had. Every sacrifice, every moment of my life was for you." He went pale, the papers shaking in his hands. "So who is your real son?" I didn't answer. The silence between us grew heavier than any words could. Ethan pressed his palms to his temples, whispering, "I don't know who I am anymore." "Now you know how I felt," I said quietly. "For years." The fight drained out of him then. His shoulders collapsed, his eyes glistened with a grief he didn't understand. For the first time, I saw him not as the boy I raised, not as the man who laughed while I was humiliated, but as someone entirely adrift. "Can we fix this?" he asked finally, his voice breaking. I shook my head slowly. "I don't know, but it's not my job to try anymore." He begged with his eyes, but I didn't waver. I walked him to the door, and when I closed it behind him, I did it gently, without anger, because the truth was no longer mine to carry alone.
No, wait, please!
It was his, too. For days after, I replayed the moment, wondering if I had gone too far, wondering if revealing the truth was cruelty or mercy. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about honesty. And honesty, though sharp, was the only gift left I could give him. Meanwhile, Olivia's world was burning. The documents I had sent to her parents spread like wildfire behind closed doors.
You remind me.
Her brand crumbled. Sponsors pulled out. Her workshops were cancelled. For a woman who lived behind a flawless mask, the cracks had become too visible to hide. I heard whispers through neighbors and mutual acquaintances. Olivia's parents had confronted her, demanding answers. Clients had backed away, suspicious of her carefully curated empire. Even her Instagram, once a shrine to false perfection, had gone silent. Ethan, trapped between a failing marriage and the truth of his stolen identity, tried to reach out again. His messages grew more frantic, each one tinged with desperation. "Mom, please. I don't know what's happening. Olivia's parents won't speak to us. We're losing everything." But I didn't reply. I had spent decades giving. Now silence was my answer.
Child, but not my
The
son.
world Ethan and Olivia built was collapsing around them, not because I screamed, not because I sought vengeance, but because I finally chose clarity. And clarity doesn't beg, it doesn't explain.
I hope he's good to you,
It
Michael.
simply stands, unshaken, while illusions fall apart. The illusion had shattered, and it was only the beginning of the end. Autumn rolled in, and with it came the final unraveling of the life I had once sacrificed everything to protect. The house sold faster than I expected. Every cent of profit signed over to me. Legally, ethically, completely mine. Ethan and Olivia were given 30 days to vacate. There were no negotiations, no extensions, no compromises. Watching them pack up their curated life, piece by piece, was like watching a stage set dismantled after the play had ended. I didn't stop the moving truck. I didn't speak to them. From a distance,
I'm so
I
glad.
saw Olivia snapping orders at movers, her sunglasses hiding the cracks in her pride. Ethan stood nearby, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear, looking like a man who finally realized the foundation under his feet had never been his. Their fall wasn't dramatic, not the kind of scandal splashed across headlines, but it was complete. Olivia's parents withdrew their support. Her sponsors fled. Her glossy empire rotted from the inside out. Meanwhile, my life was quietly transforming. I continued visiting Michael's bookstore. At first, I only bought books I barely read, but soon our conversations stretched beyond small talk. We spoke about novels, the weight of history, the quiet beauty of ordinary things. One afternoon, he laughed at a memory of his mother making apple butter every fall. His words didn't sting. Instead, they settled gently inside me because he had a mother, and I had a son who never truly saw me. That was enough truth to live with. Still, the ache lingered. Ethan hadn't disappeared entirely. Weeks after the house was listed, I met him in a small park at his request. He looked hollow, his hands clasped tightly between his knees as though he were holding himself together by sheer force. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quietly. "I just want to understand." I gave him the envelope again, the one with Ruth's letter, the hospital files, the DNA proof. He admitted he had already done a test of his own. The results were the same. "If I wasn't your son," he asked, his voice shaking, "then what was I?" I looked at him, truly looked at him, and said softly, "You were my child, but you treated me like I was nothing." He bowed his head. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "You don't," I answered plainly. "But that doesn't mean I hate you." There was a silence between us, heavy with all the years lost. Finally, he said something that startled me. "I hope he's good to you, Michael, your son." The words hit me harder than I expected. For once, Ethan wasn't dismissive or cruel. He was simply human, broken, stripped of pride. I touched his shoulder lightly before walking away. It wasn't closure,
No, you gave it
but
away.
it was enough. The true beginning, however, came in the form of a key. Michael called one evening, his voice casual but layered with meaning. "I want to show you something," he said. The next morning, I walked into the bookstore. He led me to the back where a new wooden sign hung above an arched doorway. The next chapter, it read, He handed me a brass key, small and polished.
Here you go. Thank you.
It's a new space, he explained. A cozy room for reading, for conversations, for people to feel like they belong. I want you to open it. I stared at him, stunned. You don't have to. I know, he interrupted softly, but I want to.
Here.
You've given too much of yourself to people who treated you like nothing. I want you to have this, to start something new. Tears blurred my vision as I turned the key in the lock. Inside was a warm, sunlit room. Shelves already lined with books, a rug in the center, a chair by the window. It smelled of paper and new wood, of beginnings. For a long moment, I stood still, breathing it in. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my old notebook to the last blank page. My handwriting trembled, but the words were steady. I was a woman who gave until I vanished. Then I became a woman who took it all back, not with fire,
I've heard great things about
not
it.
with rage, but with silence and truth. The next chapter is mine. When I put the pen down, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The next day, I finalized a
bit more.
donation. A portion of
got
the
it.
money from the house went to a foundation that helps women start over, women who had been dismissed, underestimated, erased women like me. They called to thank me, but I didn't need thanks. Because every time I turned the key to Michael's bookstore, every time I stepped into that room, I remembered who I was. Not Ethan's mother, not Olivia's maid. Margaret Walker. A woman, a survivor, the author of her own ending. And for the first time in my life, the key in my hand didn't open someone else's door. It opened mine. There comes a moment in life when you realize that the things you clung to so tightly, the people, the walls, the titles, even the idea of family were never truly yours. For me, that moment began the night I was laughed at in my own home. It grew in the silence of a lonely apartment, in the weight of a letter left behind by my aunt, in the discovery that the boy I raised was not the boy I gave birth to, and it ended, or perhaps truly began, with a key placed in my hand by the son I never knew I had. I had spent decades vanishing piece by piece, giving until there was nothing left of me but the shadows of sacrifice. I was the provider, the housekeeper, the silent background of other people's lives. But clarity came not as an explosion, not as fury, but as a whisper. You are done being invisible. And so I walked away. I chose silence, not as surrender, but as power. Silence can cut sharper than any blade, because it forces others to sit in the emptiness they created. Ethan and Olivia sat in that silence while their empire of lies collapsed. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was louder than anything I could have said. But truth is not only about destruction, it is also about rebirth. Through that silence, I found my real son, Michael. Not because I demanded it, not because blood entitled me, but because kindness connected us. He didn't need to call me mother for me to feel the quiet recognition in his eyes. In his presence, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt seen, and that was enough to begin again. The house, the money, the justice, all of it mattered. But none of it compared to the simple act of holding that brass key, turning it in the lock of a door that led not to the past but to possibility. The next chapter. That was more than a room, it was a symbol. A reminder that no matter how broken, how discarded, how underestimated you may feel, there is always a door waiting to be opened. And when I opened mine, I did not step into rage. I stepped into peace. So if you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever been dismissed, humiliated, or made to feel like you didn't matter, let this story be a reminder. You are more powerful than they realize. Your silence can be strength. Your clarity can be freedom. And your next chapter is waiting for you too. This is not just my story, it is a warning to those who underestimate, and a beacon to those who have been underestimated. Thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more stories of betrayal, awakening, and truth finally breaking through the lies, subscribe now to Silent Lies. Because the next story may be the one that changes how you see everything.